Hi, welcome back to using Terraform with Azure Cloud. I'm Matt, and in this video, we're going to be diving deeper into Terraform Input Variables. In the last video, we had added a variable with a default value to our configuration. Today, we're going to explore some of the other features available with input variables. Back in our configuration, you'll remember that we split our variable out into a variables.tf file. Let's go ahead and open that. Currently, we have one variable called sa1name with a default value. Since we have a default value, this configuration will not prompt for this variable at runtime. Next, let's talk about variable types. Right now, this variable doesn't have any variable constraints. That means I could pass a string, number, boolean, or any other type of data to this variable, and it will be accepted. However, this could cause issues in your configuration if the resource that's using your variable requires a specific type for an argument. The available type constraints are string, number, and bool. You can also specify the listed complex types, but we won't be covering those in this particular video. Since we're passing a string for sa1name, you would probably want to set the type to string. But let's see what happens when I set the type to bool first. Now that we set the type constraint, that variable should only accept Boolean values like true and false. Let's see what happens when I try to run this code. Now for this, I'm going to show you a command I haven't mentioned yet because I wanted to get you used to the plan and apply commands first. The command I'm talking about is Terraform validate. The validate command will check the configuration files in your directory, and it verifies that your code is syntactically correct. The validate command does not run a plan as well, so it's a quicker way to check your code if you don't need to run it against anything remote. So let's see what happens when I run a validate on this configuration right now. We're met immediately with an error that we have an invalid value for a variable. And it even gives us the details telling us that a bool is required here. Let's change that bool to a string now. Now when I save this file and run another validate, we can see that the configuration is valid. Now in order to document this variable for anyone else that might be using this configuration, we should be adding a description argument. The description argument may be optional, but I suggest making it a habit of setting it for the future you at a minimum. So let's go ahead and add a little description. The next variable I want to add for this configuration is location. For this, I'm not going to set a default, but I am going to put in a description. Next up, let's talk about validation rules. Validation rules can be set up on Terraform variables by using a validation block inside your variable block. So let's go ahead and add a validation block to the location variable. Next, we need to define a condition argument. This will be an expression that uses the value of the variable to determine if it's valid. The condition we're going to check for is that var.location equals east_us2. Notice I used the double equals here. When using validation, you also have to provide an error message. For the error message, we're just going to specify what the accepted value is so that a user will know when they enter the wrong one. Now, I'm not going to get into expressions here, but you can get pretty fancy in the validation if you like. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you use validation in your variable, it now has become case sensitive. So if you have your values in all lowercase in your condition, that's how it needs to be passed into this variable, otherwise it will fail. Now let's see what happens when I save this file, then try to run a Terraform plan, passing central US instead of east US2. We can see the validation worked, and we should see our error message that we specified. This is why you should try to make your error messages as specific as possible. The last variable I'm going to add is going to be to demonstrate setting a variable as sensitive. Setting a variable to sensitive tells Terraform not to show its value in any outputs. This should always be used for things like passwords, API keys, or anything else that someone could use to compromise you or your infrastructure. By default, the sensitive argument is set to false, but I'm going to set it to true here, and I'll add a little description. Okay, now I have all the variables I need for this demo. Let's go add them to the configuration. I like to drag my variables file over to the right like this, so I can look at both my variables and my main file at the same time. Right now, RGO1 is using the local location value that we specified in a previous video. This value is hard-coded, however, and I want to make my configuration more flexible. So I'm going to change that to use the new variable. And I'm also going to add the secret variable to the tag so you can see what it looks like in the output. Now, just as a disclaimer, I do not recommend putting sensitive information in any tags since they are plain text. I'm just doing it here to demonstrate the behavior of sensitive variables in the outputs. Okay. Make sure to save both your main.tf and variables.tf, and let's go ahead and run another plan. After a successful plan, if I scroll up in the output, let's take a look at the tags. Since we marked the secret variable as sensitive, we cannot see it in the output here. It's just marked as sensitive. However, like I mentioned, never store real secrets in your tags. Now, a configuration that prompts for variables every time it runs may work well for manual deployments. However, how do you run a configuration like this in an automated process? Variables can be specified in a couple different ways. The first option is right at the command line. To specify variables at the command line, all we need to do is use the var option when running the plan and apply commands. So for this configuration, after Terraform plan, I'll add the var option, followed by an equal sign, and then I'll put the variable and its value inside quotes, like this. And to set my secret variable, I'll do the same thing. When I hit enter, you'll notice that I'm not being prompted for the variables now. However, if there were many variables to set, the command line could get a little tedious. The next option is by using a variable definitions file, or tfvars file. This file uses basic Terraform syntax and contains only variable assignments. Let's go back into VS Code and create a new file called testing.tfvars. In this file, we'll just set the values for location and secret. Save that file, and let's go down to the command line. To specify the tfvars file in our plan, we're going to use the var file option this time. After the equal sign, we'll put the name of the tfvars file we just created. And again, the plan will run without prompting me for any variables. You can have multiple tfvar files if you want, with different variations of your variables for different testing scenarios. You can also automatically load a tfvars file if you name it in a certain way. Terraform will automatically load files called terraform.tfvars or .auto.tfvars. Let's change the name of testing.tfvars to terraform.tfvars. Now I can just run a normal plan without setting any command line options, and my tfvars file will get loaded automatically. That was a basic overview of how input variables work in Terraform. In the next video, we're going to be talking about Terraform state, so make sure to check it out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.